Namaste and welcome to another episode of Itihasdhir. We are joined today by one of our most literal eminent historian, Dr. Koenraad Elst. Namaste and welcome to Itihasdhir, sir.
Namaste. I feel very welcome. Thank you.
So today we're going to discuss Koenraad sir's book, Mahatma Gandhi and His Assassin. So, sir, would you like to give us a brief description of what the book is about?
Yes, it is a short introduction to the background of this history with the political intrigue leading up to the partition and then the consequences of the partition for the people affected, especially for the Hindus in West Punjab and Sindh and East Bengal. And so the intense unhappiness and anger of many Hindus as a consequence largely turned against Mahatma Gandhi, who was not the father of Pakistan, as some of these disgruntled people said, but at least an accomplice of the partition. And so they held him all the more responsible because he had profiled himself as a leader of the Hindus. And he, unlike all the other politicians, including all those who had opposed partition, he had actually given a guarantee that partition would happen only over his dead body. And he, moreover, unlike all the others, had a certain credibility in saying that, because he had staked his life already many times for political causes. He had fasted unto death if some demand was not met. And every time he had had his way. So if it was the British or Ambedkar or so, they tended to give in. With the Muslim League, that was more of a risk. It was not so sure that they would give in. But if he meant it, if he really wanted to stake his life, well, this was the occasion to do it. And so he didn't. And that was not liked by all the victims. And so a few of them, many of them were angry, but they didn't give any consequence to it. But a few of them meant business. And so they plotted to kill him.
So this book came out almost 9 years back, and you have very specifically mentioned Mr. Ram Swaroop and Mr. Sitaram Goyal as the two Gandhian activists who lived through it all. So in all your experience of writing the book, how did the experience of these two historians come handy? And how was it different from all the other sources that you have come across?
Yes, well, let me first give a little correction about the date of the book. Perhaps the edition that you have there is 8 years old, but the book first came out in English in 2001 or 2002, so more than 20 years ago, and that already was an English version of a book I first wrote in Dutch, and that was to come out on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the murder.
Okay.
So the book is pretty old already, but the issue is still fresh as an object of debate.
So
Okay, so you asked me about Ram Swaroop and Sitaram Goyal.
the two
Yeah.
Gandhian activists.
Right, so they had been Gandhian activists in their young days, and their attitude to Gandhi over the years has evolved differently. Ram Swaroop remained a staunch Gandhi until the end. When other people had forgotten about Gandhi or only used him for electoral purposes but didn't mean it when they declared their loyalty to Gandhi's ideals, he really meant it. And so you can see it by his critiques of Marxist economics, where he contrasted that with Gandhian economics. And so he took the Gandhian principles seriously as a guideline in tangible, everyday economic policies. Now, Sitaram Goel, by contrast, gradually joined many other Hindus in being disillusioned in Gandhi. And so he thought that Gandhi's extreme pacifism, and especially his idea that all religions ultimately say the same thing, that has been very detrimental to the Hindu cause, according to Sitaram Goel.
Okay. So another question that comes to mind is, you've mentioned the taboo document. Nathuram Godse, in his own defense trial, he had read a statement in court, and can you elaborate more on that speech and that discussion that it generated, where he had talked about why I assassinated Mahatma Gandhi? There was a book also which was published, but can you elaborate more on the speech by Nathuram Godse on the same?
Yes, so after the murder he was arrested. He didn't oppose his arrest. In a way, of course, the police also saved him because the crowd was angry with him. Anyway, so without any protest he accepted his arrest, and he knew that he was going to be sentenced to death. The law minister at the time, Dr. Ambedkar, told him in person that told his lawyer in person that the possible outcome of a commutation of a death sentence into a life sentence could certainly be considered. In fact, it could be solved quite easily, in the sense that Mahatma Gandhi himself could be invoked as someone who would not be honored by committing, I can't call it a murder, but at any rate a killing of somebody deemed guilty. So you could easily say, oh, it would be un-Gandhian to kill someone, and that way avert the death penalty. But so Godse himself insisted, let that not happen. Let me die, and let Gandhism die with it, or with me, right? So this he greatly accepted. Now he was given a normal fair trial, the Red Fort trial. They chose a specially protected place for that, and so near the end of the trial, he was allowed to read out a statement. So it was a long speech, and in that he gave all the arguments that were to justify what he had done. So we can discuss those things in more detail. If you are not in the mood of reading the book, you can more or less get the gist of the arguments from a Hindi film that was made 2-3 years ago that I've seen, about, I don't know, the name Godse is somewhere in the title, I forget the title. But at any rate, there's only one film like it. You'll easily find it, because it's a counterfactual where the murder does take place. Only the doctors managed to save Gandhi's life.
Oh.
Yes, so he survives the assassination.
Interesting.
Then he does what he does best, namely he leads an agitation. But so now the British aren't there anymore to agitate against. So he agitates against some government policy that he considers unjust. And one of his followers commits an illegal act, and so he himself is prosecuted for this. And so the government apologizes, but it has to apply the law. So he is sentenced to a jail term. So he's imprisoned in the same prison where at that time Nathuram Godse also is. He's not sentenced to death, mainly because his assassination attempt has failed. So he has effectively attempted to kill Gandhi, but he has not succeeded. So that makes the affair a little bit less serious. So he's condemned to spend time in jail together with Mahatma Gandhi. And so they have a lot of discussions together. And so in those, all the main arguments that Godse has given in reality in his speech, they pass the screen. Yes, and so the formula is very simple. In all seriousness, with a lot of grimness, Godse gives his arguments, and then Gandhiji, smiling with a superior air, manages to wave off one after another. So the movie is really meant to show the next generation, the one that is not successfully indoctrinated with Gandhism anymore, how superior Gandhi was and how wrong Godse was. That's really the message of the movie. So if you want to watch a movie rather than read a book, that would be a relatively good introduction to the contents of the speech.
And you have mentioned about the love-hate relationship that Godse had with Savarkar, where once he was inspired, he was disappointed, and there was also inner dealings that the two had. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yes, well, at a personal level, Savarkar was, a very combative man, one who didn't shy away even from murder. He was an accomplice in the murder of a British official, Curzon Wiley, in the early 20th century when he was in London. And so he was then transported to India. He tried to escape while in the harbor of Marseille in France, failed. Then he was sentenced to transportation for life, including many years in the Andaman penal colony, which was a very cruel place, unlike the velvet imprisonments that Gandhi and Nehru sometimes went through. Then he was transferred to a prison on the mainland, and then after a while he was released. Not without a promise by Savarkar himself to the British that he would henceforth shun all revolutionary methods. So he was sort of a hero, Veer Savarkar, Swatantriya Veer, the hero of independence. And for that already he was greatly admired by Godse. And even the changes in his political line he could follow. That is not what he had against him. Like, for instance, he accepted the Indian flag. You see, he himself had a far more Hindu flag. He himself had in fact designed the flag at the beginning of the century that Congress had of course overruled. But the flag that came about ultimately was quite acceptable to him. It had the orange color on top. It was a sort of it was a very communal flag. That's how Congress had meant it, with orange for Hinduism and green for Islam. And so you could say that it was a visual embodiment of the slogan of Swami Vivekananda, that what India needs is Vedantic brain and Islamic body. So orange on top, green below. Then the wheel was introduced by Nehru. So it was the white band in the middle with a blue wheel. And so that wheel was a symbol of Indian unity, Indian federalism, or the integration of a lot of small kingdoms into a big empire. He became famous through Emperor Ashoka, and that's in fact why Nehru chose it. He thought, oh, Emperor Ashoka was a Buddhist, this is a Buddhist symbol, this is good to humiliate the ugly, vicious, despicable Hindus. But, being very illiterate about Indian culture himself, he didn't know that Chakravarti was a concept that long preceded Ashoka. And so it was very much a Hindu symbol. Anyway, so all in all, the flag was good enough for Savarkar, and so he thought, all the games we played beforehand, like with, jousting about which flag it should be, that's all past. That all belonged to the history of the freedom struggle. Now we are beyond that. Now we have an independent India. Now the flag is representative for independent Indian nationhood, and so we should accept it and glorify it. So with that, it was a bit dissatisfied, but not seriously. I mean, of course, for him, Savarkar still was a hero.
And was Godse a secularist?
Yes, he was a secularist, absolutely. You see, whereas the Pakistan Walas wanted to separate the country, divide the country on the basis of religion, he wanted to keep the country united. Now, at that time, Muslims were a quarter of the population of the subcontinent, of United India. And so he was willing to take the risk of having a country with 25% Muslims. And so he did not make any suggestion that these Muslims should be denied any rights. You see, for him there were only citizens. And then of course, Hindus had the freedom to organize themselves, but within the framework of the Indian secular state. He never published, as far as I know, certainly not in the speech he gave there, any criticism of Islam as such. Ambedkar did, but Savarkar did not, and Godse certainly did not.
So now this is a very lesser known fact, because people have this image that Godse, Savarkar, they were all, proper, like they're not viewed as secularists at all in any dimension of the world.
Well, that's because people have a very flawed idea of what secularism is. You see, what Godse did was in fact a rather extreme expression of a secular view of the Indian state. He was against division by religion. He was for a state in which Hindus and Muslims were to live together. That in India is the practical interpretation of secularism.
And how do you view Ram Gopal's version of death of Gandhiism?
Yes. You made a mistake. You said Gopal. Gopal is the name of his brother.
Ram Gopal.
Gopal Godse.
Ram Gopal.
Hmm?
There's a retired civil servant.
Oh,
Gopal.
that Ram Gopal. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah. No, I thought you meant
Gopal Godse.
Gopal Godse. Yes. Yeah. Well, will you reformulate his
Yes.
position?
So, can you elaborate on
Yep.
Ram Gopal's view of the death of Gandhianism?
Well,
Why, like he had elaborated on the Nehruvian policies and
Yes.
the Gandhian
Yes.
policies, and then he talked about the death
yes,
of Gandhi.
of course, Gandhism has a hard time dying.
Yes.
I mean, I still see a number of practicing Gandhians around, both articulate, conscious Gandhians, as well as the whole Hindu nationalist movement that, if it not always was, at least has become very Gandhian. very anti-confrontation, pro-appeasement, pro-Islamic, and so on. Anyway, so when you say death of Gandhism, it is dead in this sense that the ideas deemed typical of Gandhi were abandoned when Nehru came to power. Nehru believed in modernization, believed in a modern state with admittedly a lot of Gandhian deference to the United Nations and so on, but nevertheless sufficiently modern to have an army of its own, to take the Nizam's domains by force, to include them into India, for example, or to defend Kashmir militarily. Then in economic policy, on the one hand, he was very much influenced by communism, or especially by British Fabian socialism, which he absorbed and interiorized while in Cambridge. And that, of course, was already not Gandhian. Gandhian was very much a Banya, and so some critics say that every reform he ever proposed had the net effect of favoring the interests of the Banya class. And so the communists said he was the greatest bourgeois scoundrel, right? They were not at all in favor of him. But even apart from the choice between socialism and capitalism, both of them are in favor of modern development, of industrialization. Gandhi was reputed to be against that. Yet he was instrumental in making Nehru the prime minister. You see, shortly before independence, the Congress Working Committee had to vote for a Congress president who would naturally become the first prime minister. So they had a vote, and in which Nehru got 0 votes. Most of the votes were for Sardar Patel, the other candidate. Now Sardar Patel was a very obedient Gandhian. Now Gandhi didn't like this outcome. He wanted Nehru to be the prime minister. So he prevailed upon Patel to withdraw his candidacy. So that post factum, there had been only one candidate who would then automatically be elected no matter what the number of votes he had. So with Patel's withdrawal, Nehru automatically won the vote with 0 votes, right? And so it is very much Gandhi who foisted Nehru upon India. Nehru with all the Himalayan blunders he committed. Nehru who was a disaster for India. So in very many respects, I am willing to defend Gandhi. And I think in many respects, the Godse fans whom you meet in large numbers on Twitter nowadays, you know, they are in essential respects wrong in their criticism of Gandhi. Nevertheless, this is one thing that Gandhi did that was unforgivable. He foisted Nehru upon India. Also, those who don't like Nehru's dynasty, who don't like Indira or Rajiv or Rahul, they also have to blame Gandhi ultimately. And so this was undemocratic, of course, but Gandhi never gave anyone the illusion that he was in favor of democracy. He wasn't. You know, he was the son of the prime minister of one of the princely states, you know, a remnant of feudalism. Now, of course, that would not have prevented him from becoming democracy-minded himself, but he didn't. He remained contemptuous of democracy, likening parliaments to prostitutes and stuff like that. So in a way, you know, it's consistent with his own well-attested viewpoints that he overruled the democratic decision to impose Nehru on India.
Okay. And do you take on Gandhi's, how should I put it? Do you take on to any of Gandhi's merits based on, or are any of the Gandhi's merits that you take up based on Mr. Sitaram Goyal's assessment of him?
Okay, I will answer immediately. I will first finish the answer to your earlier question because I think of something that's quite pertinent here. Why did he support Nehru? Even though he knew that Nehru was going to go diametrically against some programs that he himself was known to advocate. You know, his own medievalism, his own spinning wheel and so on would not survive Nehru in power. And so this was well known, yet he was willing to make that sacrifice because Nehru brought something Gandhian that was more fundamental. And that was, you see, culturally he was an Englishman. Gandhi was very much a British loyalist. Like in his flag, which was the same as the wheel flag, but not a wheel in the middle, but a spinning wheel, okay? He wanted to have the Union Jack in one corner, like you have today in the flag of Australia. So some loyal British ex-colonies, you know, want to
Pay tribute?
want to express their continued loyalty, their continued link with Britain this way. So he also wanted that. And even in the months around independence, the last Viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, equally wanted that. It's only Nehru, this is a merit we have to give to Nehru. You see, he said, well, I can't make this. You see, the independentist diehards in Congress will not accept this. And so that's why it became the wheel flag. But so it expresses Gandhi's pro-Britishism. In South Africa, he served in 2 British wars against the Afrikaners and against the Zulus. He recruited hundreds of thousands of Indian soldiers to go die in Flanders fields. When I was a boy, I was in the Boy Scouts. Okay, so we went to play a lot in a nearby forest, the Heverlee Bos and Meerdal Woud. And there was, in the middle of the forest, a British war graveyard. And so you had a lot of Smith and Jones soldiers, but you also had Shekhawats and Aroras and Singhs, millions of Singhs as far as I know, because of course the Sikhs were very, very much favored to serve in the British Army, and then other Singhs, or you know, Kshatriyas, whatever. So they were, you know, deemed a martial race, and so they were recruited preferably in the British Army. So many of them died a completely useless death in this war between Britain and Germany. And in the mud and so on, it was an absolutely senseless war. So they were recruited by Gandhi. And you know, in the Second World War, it was Savarkar who advised Indian young men to take service in the British Army, and he was called as a recruiting officer, which in a way he was. But you see, Gandhi had done the same thing. And of the Second World War, you could more or less justify it, saying, yeah, but this was a war that had to be fought. On both sides of the war, you see, people fought thinking, but this is a necessary war. We can't let Hitler win. We can't let Stalin win. You see, on both sides, people thought this is absolute life and death war. I am willing to give my life for this. In the First World War, you had, you know, 2 nations, not very democratic, but not anti-democratic either. I mean, there was no stake to the war. There was no cause that you were fighting for. I mean, afterwards there were stories about the war to end all wars, or the war to make the world safe for democracy and so on. Democracy and so on. This is all empty slogans. That's not what the war was about. It was a silly war between nations who had sleepwalked into a situation that they couldn't immediately extricate themselves from. But they understood rather soon that this was a senseless war. That is the war that Gandhi recruited for. So that's not what I will count among his merits. So you asked me about his merits. Well, yes, there are a number of very sizable merits.
No, I'm also asking, like, does your perception of his merits get influenced by Sitaram Goyal's perception of his merits? Was there that confluence that ever took place?
Well, I think even those who don't know anything about Goel but merely study the facts of Gandhi's politics will have to come to a similar conclusion. Like, it is well known that it is Gandhi who mobilized the masses for the freedom cause. Initially, in the words of Jawaharlal Nehru, it was a matter of lawyers, of British educated Indians, a very, very, very small minority who had political concerns. And so it is Gandhi who took the cause to the masses. And so these, walking crowds, that was the effect of Gandhi's influence. And so that you can't deny. It's not politicians like Savarkar who mobilized the masses. And so there, Goel correctly observes that Gandhi understood that to mobilize the Indian people, you do need a religious dimension. Gandhi was not at all a secularist. You see, the word secularism itself was introduced by Nehru. Nobody talked about secularism before that. And certainly not Gandhi. He was not a secularist in any sense of the word. He strongly believed in religious motivation behind what he did. He was secular in the sense that he was religiously pluralistic. He didn't want conflict on the basis of religion. But you see, that's just the Hindu principle, religious pluralism. You don't need the 17th century European idea of the nation state and so on for that. Anyway, you see, he was a religious man, and in that religion he found reason enough to take a political stand for freedom. Then another thing that many critics will not be so enthusiastic about, his pacifism, though his recruitment of Indian troops for the British Army in World War I was not really a great sign of pacifism. Nevertheless, in theory, I think it is rather defensible. Some people say, in the real world you can't be pacifist. To an extent that is correct. Like the NATO slogan, peace through strength. See, I remember in my youth there was this big thing about nuclear missiles that were being installed in Europe, coming from America. And so there were plenty of demonstrations against it, in which I also participated. And so there was a rightist student group, the Katholiek Vlaams Hoogstudentenverbond, the Union of Catholic Flemish Students. And so they were against this whole pacifist movement. And so they spread a sticker saying, peace? Yes, the NATO ensures it. I mean, this was a practical consequence they drew from peace through strength. You see, it's because NATO is strong that the Soviets aren't attacking. Or another slogan from those days, better a missile in your garden than a Russian in your kitchen. So, you see, I see the point of why an amount of military strength may be desirable. Nevertheless, Gandhi also reminded us that there is also a case for peace. Like, for instance, he insisted that he wanted to part ways with the British as friends. You see, I read now a lot of people, mocking this and despising this and saying, yeah, he was a sellout and so on. No, I think that's a very correct position against wars in general. If only we had concluded World War I by making friends with the Germans again. And like when the Soviet Union was dissolved, the Russian leadership, including Vladimir Putin, wanted Russia to join NATO. Now they protest against the idea of Ukraine joining NATO. Then Russia itself, all the way to Vladivostok, wanted to join NATO, right? Let's, get together. Now that's a very good idea, that's very sound. You see, friendship is the normal condition. If there is a war, well, that's an unfortunate interruption of that normal condition, and it should end with restoring that normal condition. Yes, let Indians and British be friends again. That's a very correct attitude. That was Gandhi. See? So, I think Gandhi has a number of undeniable merits. One also, maybe not for the people who still stick to caste. As a foreigner, I can hardly understand what caste really means for people who live through it. And so, I have no hang up about that. Now, Gandhi has the merit of putting the caste issue on the agenda. There were already anti-caste movements before him, not only by interested parties like Mahatma, for example, like Ambedkar, the Mahar himself, but for instance by the Brahmin Swami Dayanand Saraswati. And so the whole Arya Samaj movement was anti-caste, and in a more friendly, more constructive, more gradual way than Ambedkar, and then especially those nowadays who invoke the name of Ambedkar, though very much sinning against Ambedkar's own thought. So anyway, whatever the details about caste, you can of course also criticize Gandhi in going not far enough concerning caste, being in favor of Varna but not of untouchability and so on. Like for instance, you can say that initially he vetoed the marriage of his son with the daughter of Chakravarti Gopalachari, who was a Brahmin, whereas he was a Banya, so it was an intercaste marriage. He vetoed that. So what role was played in that by the consideration that it was an intercaste marriage? But then he was a child of his time. By putting caste on the agenda, almost by definition, he didn't go as far as later generations would think normal. So it was a phase in the decastification of India. Maybe not the last phase, admittedly, but a necessary phase. So that definitely is a merit of Mahatma Gandhi.
And what is your closing argument for in Gandhi's favor? Like, if only one closing argument you'd like to make for Gandhi? Well,
you see, there are all these interviews that end with a question, and And what message do you have for the people? So you see that
That you have pointed
I
out.
don't have. You see, there's a lot more I can say about Gandhi, both in the negative and in the positive sense. Like in serious matters of thought, the stuff that I, you know, endeavor to specialize in, he was often very sloppy. Like, for example, the definition of Hindu. You see, I mean, I've written and talked about that a whole lot. You know, see, these definitional issues that really, you know, a matter of serious thought. Now about that, he said, can you believe it? He said, what is a Hindu? Every good man is a Hindu. You see, I have every sympathy for Hinduism. I am a friend of the Hindus. Nevertheless, I also know a few not so good people who are Hindus. And I also know a few really good people who would not want to be called Hindu. You know, I mean, you know, whatever wrong with Islam, I know good Muslims. You know, so that is just not a very good definition. No.
Okay, sir, thank you so much for your time. And with that, we come to the end of this discussion with Dr. Koenraad Elst for his book Mahatma Gandhi and His Assassin. Do go ahead and read the book. It will give you interesting insights, and we will be having more conversations with Dr. Elst. So stay tuned and subscribe to our channel. You'll be seeing a lot more of him. Namaste and thank you.
Namaste.